Good afternoon, everyone. This is the first meeting of the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee for 2023, and I welcome all our committee members and staff and anyone online. Thanks for joining us. I'd like to invite Councillor Karakia to open the meeting with a Mihi whakatau and Karakia. Thank you.
Of under the tau whānau as well. Acknowledge all those that our support staff here today, and also our tūmaki Stephanie. Oreda. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. I've been informed that we have a quorum present, and so I'm pleased to declare the meeting open. We have one apology today, and that's our independent advisor, Graham McGlynn, who couldn't make it. Are there any conflicts of interest? No conflicts of interest. We have no public forum, deputations or petitions today, and there's no extraordinary or urgent business, and there are no notices of motion. I'd like to move to item 7.1, which are the unconfirmed minutes of the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee of the 8th of December. And I just wondered if there are any corrections or wording that needs to be amended on those. Has anyone picked anything up? No. In that case, do I have a mover and a seconder to confirm those minutes? Moved by Councillor Genevieve Robertson and seconded by Graham Naylor. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? No, carried. Thank you very much. We will now move on to item 8.1, which is the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee Resolution Status Report on page 32. Recommendation there is that we are noting the status of previous resolutions provided in the Status Audit, Finance and Risk Committee Resolutions Report February 2023. I'll ask Giles to comment on that and introduce the report.
Thank you, Chair. The only item I'd like to draw the committee's attention to is that the plan is to bring revised terms of reference to the committee in March for then endorsement and approval by council at a future meeting.
Some clarification. No questions of clarification. Thanks, Giles, for advising us of that. I'll put the motion then. That notes the status of the previous resolutions provided to the committee report on February 2023. We have a mover for that. Councillor Southworth, seconder. Seconder. Councillor Robinson. Any discussion? No discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? No. Motion's carried. Thank you very much. We'll now move on to item 8.2, the performance portfolio, second quarter 22-23. And I'd like to invite Trudy Baker, the Organisational Performance Manager, to report on this report. Thanks, Trudy.
Kia ora. Thanks, Chair. Great, so attached is the quarter 2 portfolio performance report. It's reporting on the period from the 1st of July through to the 30th of December. Progress against the 22-23 annual plan. I'm mindful that the last time we brought this to you was the very last meeting on the 8th of December. So there's been a few changes since then, and I'll really just highlight those changes. We have 40 levels of service, which represent our broad commitments to the community. Of those, 27 levels of service are on track to be achieved, and 1 has been achieved. That sets us at an achievement rate of 70%. That's down from last quarter, down from Q1, which was at 78%, and it's also down from Q2 this time last year, which was also 78%. Of the remaining levels of service, 10 are at risk and 2 will not be achieved. The issues affecting our performance are very similar to what was discussed in December, and a lot of those pressures are persisting. The labour market pressures affecting work programme delivery, specifically in the consents, monitoring and response aspects, public transport driver shortages, disruptions to work programmes stemming from last year and from earlier this quarter are still perpetuating and having flow-on effects to this year. This includes things like the consent backlog and some of the issues around the farm environment plans. Time required for effective engagement with Papatipurunanga, although we've noted that for the Kutiki Tai plan, which affects 3 of our targets, there has been significant progress in that space in December. So we're moving in the right direction, but those 3 targets are still marked as amber. This might be appropriate just to draw your attention to the 5 level of service targets that have changed since our last report back in December. And I'll refer to the appendix in the paper to do that. So the first target that's changed is 2.2. This is on page 40, and that's published quarterly reports to the Canterbury Mayoral Forum website. This is a target which was highlighted to us through the recent audit of the annual report, where Audit New Zealand were dissatisfied with the evidence that we had and how we were fulfilling that level of service. While we're working really hard to correct that and to make changes to the way those reports have been made, we are already halfway through the year, and so a lot of that work may not satisfy audit. So we're working on that one, but we wanted to mark that one as amber following the annual report audit. The next one, which is new for Q2, is also on this page, target 4.1. This one relates to the engagement with Papatipurunanga relating to the essential freshwater package. This essentially is the Kutiki Tai integrated plan work, and as I mentioned earlier, there are 3 targets which are affected by our progress in this space. Both the essential freshwater package, the regional policy statement, the RPS, and the coastal plan. And as I said, significant progress has been made in this space, and we're continuing to make progress, but it's a challenge whether we will meet this target or not for this year. Progressing on to page 43, there are 2 new targets here which have turned amber this quarter. Target 26.1A, page 43. This is to finalise the scope of a regional river strategy. Work has been ongoing and there has been concern around our ability to progress this piece of work. I've been advised today, and certainly in Q3, where we're more back on track with this than what we were at the end of the last quarter. So the team are really prioritising this piece of work, and engagement is ongoing and is supporting the development of this piece of work. So while this was amber at the end of Q2, we're hopeful that this one will be back on track by the end of Q3. Next one is 26.3, also on this page, complete a review of the gravel management strategy. This target is really recognising the work required to refresh that strategy, and it seems to be a case of the more work which is done in this, there's increasing the various parties have got different interests, and we're working really hard with those parties to come up with a resolution to ensure that the gravel management strategy is appropriate. We'll continue work on this one, but the direction is that it's more important to get this right than to do it in time, and so we may extend the time required to get this fit for purpose. And the last target, which has changed, is on the following page, page 44, target 32.2. And this relates to the number of Enviro schools. So we'd hope to engage with 25 Enviro schools this year, and that number is a little down based on delays from COVID and schools' ability to participate in this program. I might pause there. That's really the summary of the targets, and take questions.
Great, thanks very much, Trudy. I'm going to ask for any questions of clarifications. Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm sorry I didn't raise this in the pre-meeting part, but I was without my computer. I couldn't get myself organised enough. But on page 41, target 9.2, which is the Farm Environmental Plan consents, which you say is changed to orange because of discussion with up to the Runanga. Yeah. What are the implications? Because as I understand it, the audits are going ahead, but the auditors are informing consent holders that in fact they won't get their audit, their audit won't be registered as being valid until there's Runanga approval, and they don't know when that's going to happen. So what are the implications for us being able to report on those targets if we're being held up? And what are the implications for the consent holders if they see that their consents are sort of in limbo because they haven't had those audit results in terms of being able to report back to financiers or other requirements that they may have for their own businesses?
Can any staff answer that, where we're at with that? No? Bring it back to, yeah, thank you. We'll take note of that question. Thanks. Any other questions for clarification? Councillor Karakia?
Enough we. And baby. I just want to return back to 26.3, complete a review of the gravel management strategy. And I attended the Te Pai Herenga hui here in early December. It seemed to me that they were quite positive moving this forward, but I see here we are at risk of not achieving this target due to the time required to allow for meaningful engagement with partners and stakeholders. Define meaningful.
My understanding of that statement is that it's relating equally or potentially more on the stakeholder engagement and the other interested parties in gravel management. In terms of defining meaningful, it's so we've got confidence that we're able to make the policy, which is.
I think so. Would you include by getting it? I would believe it being very.
Yeah.
Stephanie, sorry, Stephanie, you were looking at having a response there.
Thank you through you, Chair, and also Councillor Mackenzie. I know that you're aware of a number of the conversations with regard to the gravel management. This remains a frustration for us. It is not with regard to our partnership with Runanga. It is about the stakeholders, and that is that we need to have very clear conversations. They're actually very supportive as well. They want us to get on with it faster than we are. And I can update you that Lee Griffiths has had a very clear conversation with the team that this needs to be accelerated. I think we have created some hurdles for ourselves that aren't necessary. There's some proactive things that we can do, and I've asked her to provide an update. I will provide that to you separately, councillors, and to all council, but I do not regard the Runanga as a matter of an issue.
Great, thank you. Any other questions for clarification?
Just make a comment about the gravel management, because it's a topic of discussion that's come up at all the river rating scheme meetings, which we've just been attending, and it's an element of risk to this council that if we don't make progress on this, the community and I accept it's not the Runanga or Papatu Aitahu such that are the hold up. So, but part of it is as I understand it, is that we're trying to have a single plan for the whole of the region, and we've got so many different variances of how we should manage our gravel. But clearly, some of the issues around not being able to work in water and things like that are really putting some of the river schemes at risk, because we can't actually take shit out where clearly it should be coming out, and those sorts of things. And I don't, as you say, I don't think it's the Runanga that are holding those up. There's other stakeholders who are putting stakes in the sand, stakes in the riverbed, as you might in this case. So there are elements of risk there. So we do need to progress this, however we do that.
Yeah, at that Tupai heading meeting, I mean, there was some frustration there about, about how they just want to get on with it and have a clear line of sight as to what input is needed from them and whether they could actually be part of that extraction. Yeah.
Thanks, councillors. Yeah, and we'll pick that up again with Stephanie at a separate briefing. One more question no further questions. Okay, thanks, Trudy. You may leave the table.
If I may, just one final piece of update is to let councillors know that we had been working on an online hub, a reporting back hub, where we're able to make all of this information available on our website much closer to essentially at this time now, so just a couple of weeks after the end of the quarter. And we're making really good progress on that. That's going to go live in February, and will provide levels of service information alongside work program updates, which you would typically be receiving during committee meetings. That will be available towards the start of the quarter, lined up with all of our comms material, media releases, news stories, that sort of thing. So councillors will receive an update when that becomes live this quarter, and that will become a really valuable resource for the community to engage with our portfolios. My final statement is just letting you know that, thanks, as Nook pointed out, baby's on the way, and I'll be leaving ECan at the end of this week, actually, for 12 months of parental leave, and my colleague Carmen Marsh will be taking over my role as Organisational Performance Manager. Thanks, Carmen.
Thanks for that, Trudy, and all the best for the next few weeks and thereafter. Thank you very much. So I'll put the motion then that we note the status of the levels of service for Q2 of 22-23. Do I have a mover? Councillor Karakia, seconder. Councillor Southworth. Any further discussion? No further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is item 8.3, risk framework, and John Gamba, the Manager of Risk Assurance and Security, will introduce the report for us. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, a big step for us in terms of risk management. The risk management framework is a very important document, setting the tone for risk management throughout the organisation, ensuring a consistent approach, not only in how you document and manage, but also the monitoring and assurance around that. I'm going to take it as read. Just a few comments on the document. This is a big step in the maturity, and it actually, just note, it's a living document. So as we use it, we will find improvements. We will bring that back at times to have those confirmed. And there'll be a phase 2 to this to improve it to full best practice. So I will take it as read, and just the aim is obviously to get feedback from the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee on the document, but also seeking then the endorsement for approval by Council. This is a Council document, so any questions?
Councillor Sunkel.
Thank you for this paper, and as you rightly say, it's a significant step up from where we were. My question relates to page 58, risk appetite, and I think there was another piece on risk appetite further on, where page 68, and perhaps more reference to page 68, and the bullet point that compromise people's health, safety, and well-being at any time for any reason that could lead to serious or critical harm. No appetite for any residual risk that can potentially lead to fatality. I accept what we're saying in there, but it's a question that we've also raised at civil defence and in emergency management. Where is the point of looking at mitigation, looking at training, when you know that you cannot mitigate every risk, but services or jobs have to be done? So I understand why we have it written in there, but I guess how do we balance that with some of our processes where inherent risk is inherent risk and we cannot mitigate? Do we stand back and cross our arms? It's those kind of challenges. And I take that from my own practice as a paramedic. We can put police in front, we can do all sorts of things, but ultimately we are responsible for our safety and our training and processes to get us through what can be dangerous situations. So I'm just not sure how we approach that in this space if we have an absolute in there.
Thank you for the question, and I hope I understand it correctly, and I'll attempt to answer it. So just the focus of page 68 and 69 is all around residual risk. So if we have an inherent risk, so we say a certain activity, process, or what we do has got the potential inherently to lead to a fatality or a serious harm, we need to mitigate that. And we then look at what we've got in place, the training, PPE, whatever controls we can put in place to mitigate that risk. This goes to the residual risk. So if we look at our controls and we come to the realization that after everything we've done, it's still sitting in that red, it is still pretty certain that we can lead to harm. And that's when we say, stop. That's where we say we've got a low appetite for that, if not, in fact, no appetite for that. So stop doing it. First, come back to the table, come back to the chief executive. Let's relook at what we can do more, or the additional things we can do to bring it down. But we're articulating that we need to do something to get it lower. And of course, the next page, as you rightly say, 69, if you look at the critical residual risk in safety and well-being, we say we've got no appetite. Where with all the others, we say stop the activity and first get approval. We say we've got no appetite for that.
I recognise what we're saying, but I guess the practicality of a USAR team, if it was under civil defence control crawling through a building as they were, this process would say, stop, that's it, we are not going anywhere because we cannot mitigate and manage. So my question is, when we meet those situations, how do we continue the business that must happen when we have a statement that says you shall not? I'm just trying to explore how we actually get to the point of doing the things we have to do, noting the residual risk is always going to be there when we have an absolute in the line. I'm not saying we're wrong, but it's how do we, in a practical sense, get to that point of fulfilling our duty when we have an absolute in the space?
I think that what's needed is just some clarifying statement on page 68. If I refer to page 69, which I think is where John is, that John, not Councillor's uncle, he's looking at the top two left boxes, which is when we've assessed the controls, it's still critical when we've done that. You're talking about the practical application of that on a day-to-day basis. We're saying actually when we've looked at the situation, looked at the mitigating controls, if it still sits in these at that assessment process, we wouldn't do it. However, if it sits below that, we continue to practice. So I think it's just about saying, it's just clarifying that actually this statement are referring to the assessment that we do.
Yeah, yes and no. I understand the assessment, but the practical application of what
example of a flood event, and obviously there's a risk to life in an emergency management situation. So our approach to that, I'm now ad-libbing, but our approach to that would be: have we trained people appropriately? Are there multiple people around? Have they got the appropriate PPE? Have they got life jackets, etc., etc.? They make that assessment, recognising that still going into the river at that point, there is clearly a risk to life because they're going into a dangerous situation. However, we don't believe that they haven't got life jackets, they haven't been trained, they haven't got ropes, they haven't done an assessment, but they're still going to go in the river.
I guess, I mean, just as my assessment of the conversation is this is regardless of mitigations, which may be the ropes, the life jackets, the training, everything else, we are saying regardless of all that, we consider it too risky, you will not go in. That's how I guess read the statement. But
assessing the situation at a planning step.
I think, John, would you like to clarify?
If we have the ropes and we've got everything, the residual risks shouldn't sit at critical still. That's the point. So the point is you've just got no appetite to carry on with that work if there's no mitigation to actually protect somebody from fatal harm. That is almost certain.
I understand. Just the way I read it is no mitigation or no states. If there is no, we will accept no residual risk, therefore we will stop. And that's which to me says we will not do anything regardless of the mitigation we put in place. That was just, that's we've had a conversation.
I think that the reality is that there are circumstances, and you'll know better than me, John, because you operate in this space. There are circumstances whereas if you look at the controls in place and the situation that the people should not go into the river. They should not go into the event. They should not go into the fire. They as individuals choose to do so against the risk assessment that they have been trained to do. And I think that this situation, I think, was close in the recent floods down in Timaru, where there was a situation where it was people should not be going in to rescue the people because it's going to put them at risk as well as the individuals. However, individuals will always choose to do things that at an organizational level, at a risk assessment, when you're sitting there, you would go, you wouldn't do that. And I think that that's the difference.
Thanks, John. Just a comment from me. I mean, the next level down is high. In all of those situations, the chief executive has some responsibility to approve or discuss or find a way through the problem. That's my take on that. It's a guidance of caution. But we had a question of clarification from Councillor McKenzie.
Does this apply to our contractors who are doing work on our behalf? So especially in river protection, that sort of work?
Absolutely, because we're responsible for the risk. So we would like to use this to assess that overall situation there and make sure that the necessary controls are in place to protect.
So in those circumstances, I mean, I'm a bit with John. I'm a little nervous about the detail to which this plan goes into, and I'm mindful of a few years ago when the New Zealand Defence Force was done by OSH for risking its soldiers not going into battle. You know, which seemed like the ultimate moronic irony. But when you're training soldiers to be killed, and then you're worried about their health and safety. But you know, in this case, there'll be contractors who'll be making their own assessments, and then I guess in the circumstances where your assessment or our assessment here might be different to their assessment as to the risk and the mitigations, how do we resolve those sorts of dilemmas?
Well, I have in practice in the past, you have to deal with it on a case-by-case basis, and that's what this document does. as soon as you do that assessment, you see the discrepancy, it says stop and actually approach either the chief executive or the ELT and let's resolve the matter. And this is what this does. As soon as you see it and identify it, you see there's a problem that where there's a residual high risk in this situation, it says with the risk appetite, let's just stand back, stop, and let's make sure everything happens safely and so on. And also, I just want to reiterate one last thought here. This risk appetite, that's the appetite that we're willing. This is a recommendation. It's the appetite we're willing to accept. So
I accept that, and I'm trying not to be judgmental at this stage, or even have an opinion. But I'm just trying to explore a bit like John, and so if and a case in point was after the May floods. About a month later, we had a second flood, and one of the major breaches had been fixed, but it was in danger of going again, which would have put Ashburton and a whole lot of individuals at risk. And the contractor was determined to not let the breach reoccur. And I asked him, one stage we were standing on the stop bank, which every time they turned on their vibrating roller was like standing on jelly, rolling jelly. He said, I said, oh, how safe is this? He said, oh, it could go any minute, he said. And there was water pissing out the toe on the dry side. And it just, you know, I think he understood the risks. His staff understood the risks. If he'd stopped, we would have lost the breach because it was critical that everything was working. And it was, I don't know the actual risk, but it was touch and go as to whether we saved the day. And ECan's decisions and the contractor's decisions in combination did save the day in that case, and nobody was hurt. But it would be interesting to know that if you did the assessment, I suspect you might have stopped operations, in which case there might have been a whole lot greater risk to personal safety downstream than if we hadn't carried on with that level of risk.
Thanks, Councillor Mihi. I don't think you need to answer that, John. It's a case by case basis, but Stephanie, just.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I just wanted to add, because Lisa's not in the room, MPI, Department of Conservation, they share some of the same dangerous tasks that we do, and they certainly are concerned about their contractors, and we are working with them in this space precisely because there is a very real liability to us. And I will speak as the chief executive who will go to prison and will pay for said fine. But more importantly, I care about the people going home at the end of the day. I think in an instance of emergency, Councillor, there will be some tough calls made. And I think every time I have seen that, it is about making the best decision for minimizing loss of life, the one versus the many. And that is certainly the kind of call we have made. And so, Councillor Sunkel, I recognize the question in the context of civil defense and emergency management. And I think those people are trained well, and we do have these mitigations in place. Some of this is also about the fact that we have, with our staff, identified areas where, although they are working with water and they are well versed, they are not fully implementing the regular checks we need them to do. And so without me sending a message to them in this manner about what is and isn't acceptable, they won't get the clarity about it is stop work. But I can assure you that we will make good calls in the face of emergency around the one life versus many, which I think, Councillor McKenzie, is also what you're raising in your scenario.
Thank you. Just a clarification question from Councillor Southworth.
Yeah, so just firstly a comment, bow tie analysis, as mentioned, I don't know what that is. It'd be helpful to have something in here that explains that, because I think it's meant as a document for people who aren't necessarily experts in this area. And then a question is around, so under reporting on page 60 of 90, it's 60 on mine. I don't know. Yeah, in it's under reporting in this, so monitoring and then reporting in this thing. On the second bullet point, it talks about every risk with a residual score of 15 or higher comes to the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee. And I just question why so high, because I was just looking, for example, at picking 10. We've got, yeah. So So 12 could be a likely and serious event. And, serious, it talks about, for example, disruption to local community, material measurable environmental effects up to 6 months, injury requiring time away from work, etc. So it feels to me like maybe that 15 is a little bit too high, because that's actually quite a significant amount of potential interest to the council. And so I just question where that number's sitting, and maybe have a think about it, or like to comment.
Yes, thank you. That's just what normally happens, but it is ultimately up to the council to decide what they want to see, and recommendation by this forum. So, yeah, it can be changed to 10. And just with reference to the bow tie, it's just a more detailed look at the threats and the causes and the controls, etc. And it will only be done by specific individuals in the organisation. But I'll actually go and add a little bit on it, how it works, and just a bit, maybe a bit of an illustration of what it's about.
Thanks, John. Graham Naylor.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to go further than Councillor Southworth and remove all reference to risk weightings. And I say that because I think it's important that emerging risks, which might start off relatively low, are still apparent to governors and this committee. And that's normally the way I've seen those risks reported. So rather than try and set a threshold and argue where it should be, I just think we should remove all reference to setting a threshold for reporting and monitoring. Chair, I have a number of questions or comments. Do you want them all at once, or
Picking up on that one, my understanding is that, am I right, John, and that the guiding document for this is an Australian New Zealand standard, is in terms of the audit and the risk assessment process. So we're following a process that hasn't just been designed by John. It is within the context of a broader Australasian standard. And I feel personally happy with the document. I think it's really well written and really clear. And it is a process. It's a procedure, and as John says, it is adaptable. It is potentially dynamic if we find that there are issues with it. This is my view. But Graham, if you could just carry on with any of your questions, please.
Thank you, Chair. On page 52, under the heading Audit, Finance and Risk Committee, the second bullet point uses the word endorsement. I think, to me, that implies a decision has already been made. I think it would be preferable to use the word recommend, because ultimately it's the council that will make the decision. My next question is on page 60. The first paragraph refers to the risk oversight group. I couldn't find them defined or anywhere else in the document.
Risk oversight group is that's an oversight, should be changed to executive leadership team.
Thank you. And excuse me, also on page 70 under governance, I wondered whether, given that ECan is a public sector organisation, conflicts of interest should be added to the other points that are noted under that paragraph.
The paragraph number. Page 70.
Oh yeah. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. Thanks. Is that all? Is that all? Thanks, Graham. Thanks, John. Is there anything?
Yeah, Chair, no, certainly recommend. We can change the word to recommend. That's no problem. Risk oversight group will change, and then the list on page 70 is not an exhaustive list at this time. It will grow, but a good addition. So we will add that. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Councillor Southworth, maybe final.
It's not a question. I was hoping we could pick up on Graham's. Is there going to be discussion after that we can?
I'll just put the motion then. And the motion is there are three parts to it. You'll note that item 2 and 3 there are actually mentioned as page. They're just picking up. So item 2 and 3, or recommendation 2 and 3, are picking up the next steps items on page 47. So look, I'll read those out. The motion is that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee 1 recommends that the risk management framework is provided to Council for approval. 2 notes that the framework will be updated with any feedback received from the committee. And it's important given our discussion. And 3 notes that an ongoing training and support program will be drafted and implemented. John, you may leave the table. Thank you. Do I have a move? Sorry, John. Do I have a mover? Graham Naylor, second. Councillor Sunkel. Is there further discussion on the report? Councillor Southworth.
So I'd like to pick back up on that, the numbers at which we get reports come with the residual risk scores, because I understand this is a process, but ultimately it's about outcomes. It's about making our organisation safer and looking after staff, and also things like our reputational risk. And I just feel, particularly given that we're on a journey, we haven't had a glowing report on our health and safety. I think it'd be really good for us to have that oversight of, what risks do we have? Where are they sitting? What are the factors? What are the mitigations? And then, we can sort of track and see, is this process actually improving our outcomes? Maybe in Australia, maybe a lot of companies are already well ahead of this. I know their health and safety has been, I think, on the whole, been rather ahead of Australia, New Zealand for a while. So, I think we're on a learning journey, and I think it'd be really good for this committee to really understand what's going on. And the only way to do that is to drop the bar on that 15. So that's just what I would say. I'm happy to listen to others' view, and for John Gamba to reconsider and see what he feels might be appropriate balance between Graham's everything. If Graham's seen it work elsewhere and it's not overwhelming, because what you don't want to do is lose important detail amongst a whole rake of information. That's your balancing act here. Maybe you could have a look at some things, some of the organisations you've seen, and have a look and see where does it sit best for us.
Graham Naylor.
Thank you, Chair. all the committees that I sit on report all the risks, and they do that because, as I said, emerging risks are very important to identify, but also they report the trend in the risk, whether it's improving or getting worse or staying still, which I think is also a key bit of information that committees like this should be having at their disposal. So that's why I think it's best to, how do you pitch a level which you only report above? If it's a risk and it's significant enough to record it, I think you should report it.
Thanks, Graham. I think what we'll do is we'll note some of the comments in respect to the resolution, and we'll pass them on to John and the team for review, and if necessary, incorporation into the final document that'll go to council for approval. Giles, if you could.
I think the conversation and feedback's been really helpful. I'd just like to recognise the work that John and his team have done in this space, and also to recognise that we are on a journey and we want to help, particularly this committee, the council, and also the executive team and others to mature in the risk management space. The intent was to try and differentiate the focus of the different levels of management, so that obviously this group is primarily interested in strategic risks for the organisation. There are a number of significant operational risks and project-related risks that you may not want to be, if we're doing this properly, drowned in all of the risks that are reported. But recognising that if something has a significant residual level, then you should know about it. So that's the difference. I think that there is, and it's very difficult to articulate in a document, is there will be some common visibility of all level risks at a particular level. And I'm thinking strategic risks, you will always see the complete suite and where they sit and how effective the assurance is, even if the residual risk is low. Well, those risks that sit at maybe a lower level, then we'll be flagging those ones to you that are of critical residual risk, the ones that will have an impact. So, for example, probably a bad example, but we have the national ticketing program going on. That's a major program of work that we are involved in with Whakamutunga. It's at a project level or a program level. Where there's a significant risk associated with that, we would bring that to this council's attention rather than giving you the complete risk register for that project, which there is one, which is extensive. And continually seek feedback from this committee and from ELT and from colleagues around the organisation about how is this working? Are you getting the visibility? Are you getting the comfort? And I suppose that's the intention, and I think that's why John has presented this as a living document. We are in effect dipping our toe in the water in this space at the moment. We have 13 strategic risks. Let's get those finished, even though they're never finished, so that we can report them. Some major projects, and then we will respond and engage with you about what is appropriate, just as we will respond and engage with the executive team and others across the organisation.
First day back at work, and my brain's working a bit slowly, but more slowly. But in terms of Graham's comments, as I understand it from a governance perspective, if you know of a risk, you've got to do something about it. So, which goes to the heart of what you're trying to say, isn't it? And so, I guess I'd be interested in our legal position if we were to go with the recommendations in here rather than listening to Graham's advice as to whether in fact we would still have a legal liability, or the organisation would have a legal liability in terms of not addressing its full health and safety issues if we do use a threshold beyond which we report.
So I think the intention is that risks apply at a number of levels in an organisation. And we want to try and differentiate what is relevant to the work of this committee at a governance level. So at my local, I've got a number of projects that report to me, I'm the sponsor for. There are risk registers associated with each of those. I don't believe this committee or even the executive team need to see the complete risk registers for those. So it's just trying to recognise that you want to be able to see the wood for the trees, but the onus is on us and to be able to provide assurance that we are reporting up those things, because ultimately if things are critical, then they have to pass certain thresholds, i.e. they have to have a significant impact on the organisation or a significant financial implication or a significant risk. So there could be something that's really important for the success of a particular project, but the project is so small that actually it isn't going to impact. And this is an art, not a science. So we are trying to work our way into that. I suppose I've worked with a number of organisations where we've given them the complete risk registers and they've gone, whoa, and then we've gone to just give them the ones that are red, and they've gone, but this just makes it look like everything's burning because we don't see that there's any other colours. We just see red, and the balance is somewhere in between. And I don't know where that right balance is, but I think you're right, Graham, in terms of how do we give you visibility about things that are emerging and changing. And that's about the conversation. That's the art rather than the science, I think.
Thanks, Giles. Yeah, this is a framework we've got to remember. Anyway, I've already put the recommendations. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Carried. Thank you very much for the discussion. I think that was really good and hopefully helpful to the team. We're now going to item 8.4, which is the monthly financial report for November, December. And who's presenting that? Brian. Thank you very much for coming to the table.
As the report shows, year to date at the end of December, we're in a very positive position against our budget. However, there are a number of moving pieces involved in this puzzle. The primary cause of that positive situation at the moment is delays in the area of public transport and water and land programs. So obviously, on that basis, it's not part of a plan in order to balance our budget. It's simply an outcome of the physical operations of the business not being able to keep up with what had originally been planned in those areas. Obviously, that will then, of course, have potential knock-on effects to the end of the year and then into 23-24. So it's something just to keep in mind in terms of the representation of what's happening in that program space that Trudy was talking about in greater detail. Other than the impacts of those underspends at the moment, there is also the some minor savings in the corporate area, which is offsetting part of a $2.3 million worth of enforced savings that we built into the budget originally. And then another piece, which is the consenting position, which currently to the end of December is running pretty much flat at the moment. We're not showing any particular size deficit at this point. So essentially year to date, it's a story all about those delays causing underspends. We've just completed our 6+6 reforecast for the year, and it does show quite a significant swing in the other direction. The impact is really we maintain our public transport and water and land underspends because we're not going to catch up in those areas. But what we're seeing also is there is a bit of catch up in the corporate area. So we're starting to lose some of that coverage for those enforced savings. And our consenting position deteriorates quite quickly into the second 6 months. From January, we will be looking at a fully staffed up consenting group, and we will start to be working on the backlog, which doesn't have the kind of revenue recovery that we had originally budgeted for in this area. So by the time we get to 30th of June, there could be a significant deficit in the consenting area, which will be dragging down our performance against overall budget. We do, however, or have previously in the year identified some areas for additional efficiency savings, which we will then apply to offset that negative impact of the consents work. So we still expect to come in on or better than budget at this point, but it will not be in the same mix as we had originally budgeted from the beginning. And obviously this will then flow into the 23-24 year in terms of having additional impacts on the squeeze we'll be under in that year in terms of some of this delayed work then flowing into that year. Any questions?
Any questions? Clarification? I just have one, Brian, on page 78, item 12 there, underspend on vehicle replacement, capital expenditure. Are those likely to need to be, or are they likely to be sort of in the catch-up situation 2023?
Yeah, we are ordering vehicles and 18 months later they turn up. So there is a very odd supply chain situation occurring. So that's fundamentally the cause of what's going on there. So if the supply chain clears again, we could see those come through.
Giles, if you like to.
So just to add to what Brian said, Brian and the team are undertaking work as previously highlighted to the committee on a longer term multi-year asset program to recognise that we will continually be purchasing vehicles for software or other assets, so that they actually have a long-term plan to invest and replace and maintain those, whether we own them or lease them, because ultimately it doesn't matter whether we own or lease the vehicles, we still need the vehicles. But as anybody who's tried to order a car of certain brands will know, they take a significantly long time to get into the country at this point in time.
Thanks, Giles. Well, if there's no further questions, then Brian, you can leave the table. Thank you. I'll put the motion then for item 8.4, that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee 1 receives the portfolio health and financial health report for the period ended 31st of December 2022. Do I have a mover for that? Councillor Robinson, seconder, Graham Naylor. Any further discussion? No further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? No one against. Carried. Thank you very much. So next item 8.5, and that's on key project reporting, and invite Giles Southworth to speak to that.
Southwell, but you know.
And just no, Councillor Southworth's just leaving, but thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is, I think this is either the second or third time that we've brought this report, which highlights the progress being made with what we believe are some critical and key projects across the organisation, recognising that it is a work in progress and will be updated to reflect feedback on an ongoing basis from both the LT and this council. And as we move forward into annual plans and LTPs, we will update and change this so that it is relevant, particularly for this committee, to give them an overview of those critical programs of work or projects that are in train. The key thing I draw your attention to is there is still work going on in relation to the financials in this report to make sure that we are reporting those in a consistent basis. You will, if you look closely, there is a different interpretation about how those financials should be reported in some of the projects. So the finance team will work very closely with the project management office to ensure consistency going forward. The intent being to give a view of the entire life of the programme or project, so that you can see where the forecast spend is against actual, so that you are not, but we're not restricted to individual financial years when most programmes operate over multiple years. But that is still the most significant part of the report that is still work in progress. But I'm happy to try and answer any questions, although I think most of my colleagues are in the room who are the sponsors of many of these projects, if there are any that I am unable to answer.
Any questions on the projects or the report? Councillor.
Kia ora. Just the Odeon CBD land deal. So yeah, that. What's the status of that?
So the current status of that is we've had a strategic business case completed by PwC, which has been reviewed internally. We have currently planned a briefing council on that next week, with a decision paper coming to full council in March is the current plan, with a recommendation about what to do with the Odeon and the associated land that council owns around Tulip Street. So subject to council decision and advice, there will be a recommendation made. It also include a recommendation around what action, if any, we take to remove the containers, because we know that the City Council is very keen to get on with some traffic management work on Tulip Street and open up that freeway again.
Kia ora, thank you. We look forward with bated breath. We look forward with bated breath actually to hear what that is all going to be about.
No further questions. That's good. Thanks, Giles. It's good to know that we might get a more update on the financial reporting against these.
I apologise.
They're a bit straight lined.
They're a bit inconsistent. Yes, yeah. Best way I can describe it. Yeah.
Great. Okay, no more further questions of clarification, then I'll put the motion. And the motion is that agenda item 8.5, key projects reporting, that the Audit, Finance and Risk Committee receives the notes and notes the key projects report for the period ending 31 December 2022. Any further discussion? No further discussion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? No. Carried. Thank you very much. Seconded by, sorry. Yeah, Graham Naylor. Moved. Councillor Karakia. Thank you. So we're now are going to move into public excluded to deal with a few items. Time is 2:05. 2:07. Okay, so I'll just move that we go into public excluded. I move that John Gamba, Manager, Risk Assurance and Security, be permitted to remain at this meeting after the public have been excluded, and that Brian Elliott, Chief Financial Officer, be permitted to remain for items 9.2.2, and Juanita Victor from PwC Partuna, and Lisa Van der Pla, Health and Safety and Wellbeing Manager, for item 9.2.3, because they have knowledge relevant to the matters under consideration. The resolution to exclude the public set out in pages 97 to 98 of the agenda be adopted. Do I have a move by Councillor Sunkel, seconded by Councillor Karakia. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? No. Carried. Thank you. So we'll now wait for staff to move us out. Okay, thank you. We're now back in the public meeting. Item 10, the next meeting is to be held on Wednesday, the 15th of March, 2023. And I'll now declare the meeting closed at 3:07 and invite Councillor Karakia to close with a Karakia.
Me te aroha tātua me te whiwhina teitangi tuairu tapu, ake tōna atu, amene.